Raven's Hollow, a coastal village forgotten by time, was a place where the wind cut to the bone and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs echoed like a mournful lament. An aura of mystery hung over the village, fueled by stories of hauntings and dark secrets. Richard, a fearless young adventurer, has always been fascinated by mysterious places and dark stories. When he heard about the abandoned lighthouse in Raven's Hollow, he knew his next adventure awaited him. The legends surrounding the lighthouse were terrifying. The light had gone out decades ago, and the last caretaker had mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only sinister shadows and stories of nightmares. Packing up his things, Richard set off towards Raven's Hollow. The winding path that led to the village seemed to be shrouded in perpetual fog, making the journey even more haunting. As he got closer, the cold wind cut into his face, and the sound of the waves increased in intensity. The village was deserted when he arrived. The fishermen's houses seemed abandoned, and there was no sign of life in the narrow, winding streets. The few residents who still remained in the village had locked their doors and windows, as if they were hiding from the outside world. The lighthouse, however, stood imposingly on top of a sheer cliff. The stone structure, covered in moss and ivy, stood like a shadowy guardian of the raging waters below. The stories about that place had attracted him like a magnet, and he was determined to unravel the mystery surrounding the lighthouse. Richard parked his car near the base of the cliff and contemplated the steep climb that would take him to the lighthouse. The path was winding and dangerous, but he was not intimidated. With his backpack on his back and a flashlight in hand, he began the climb. As he climbed, the whispers of the wind echoed in his ears, as if whispering silent warnings. The vegetation around him seemed to grab him, like claws trying to stop him from proceeding. The atmosphere was permeated with a sense of oppression, but Richard did not waver. Finally, after a tiring climb, he reached the top of the cliff. Before him stood the lighthouse, with its Gothic tower that seemed to touch the dark skies. The wooden doors were ajar, as if inviting Richard to enter a world of mystery and terror. A shiver ran down his spine as he pushed open the doors and entered the lighthouse. The inside was dark and dusty, with cobwebs hanging in the corners and a musty smell in the air. Furniture covered in dusty sheets and old photographs adorning the walls told the story of a place that had been abandoned long ago. Richard turned on his flashlight and began exploring the lighthouse. He wanted to unravel the mystery behind the extinction of the light that had once guided sailors to a safe haven. As he made his way through the shadowy corridors, he had no idea what awaited him in the depths of the Raven's Hollow lighthouse. As Richard explored the halls of the lighthouse, a feeling of oppression seemed to grow around him. The darkness that enveloped him was suffocating, and the feeling that he was being watched tormented him. However, his determination did not waver. He was determined to find out what had happened in that dark tower. As he climbed the spiral stairs that led to the top of the lighthouse, the howling wind outside seemed to invade the interior, creating a ghostly wail. Richard could feel the tension in the air as he approached the top. When he finally reached the highest point, his flashlight illuminated a terrifying scene. The room that was supposed to house the lighthouse light was completely flooded. Dark, icy water filled the space, reflecting the dim light of his flashlight. The lantern did not emit a light that could guide navigators, but rather a shadowy reflection of a lighthouse that had long lost its function. Richard was perplexed. How had a lighthouse that had kept generations of mariners safe turned into an underwater death trap? He felt a growing sense of panic as he watched the waters surrounding him, as if they were about to swallow him. Desperate to find a way out, Richard began searching the top of the lighthouse. He found locked doors and sealed windows. Every attempt to escape was in vain, as the lighthouse had become an underwater prison, sealing their fate. The hours passed, and Richard felt like he was losing track of time. The constant sound of the waves and the oppressive darkness began to affect his mind. He screamed for help, but his words were lost in the relentless sound of the ocean. It was then that something strange happened. Richard began to hear soft, barely audible whispers coming from the depths of the ocean. They sounded like distant voices, calling him by name. At first, he thought he was imagining things, but the whispers persisted. "Richard, you're lost," the voices whispered, "but I can free you if you make a deal with me." Richard was immobilized by fear. who or what was speaking to him from the depths of the ocean. His voice was soft, almost mesmerizing, but he knew that making a deal with something so mysterious and unknown was dangerous. However, the feeling of desperation impelled him to consider the offer. He was trapped in a lighthouse that had become his underwater tomb. Richard finally mumbled an agreement, hoping to find a way out of this desperate situation. The lighthouse shook slightly, as if responding to the pact made. The surrounding waters seemed to churn with supernatural intensity. Richard didn't know what his decision had triggered, but he was willing to risk everything for a chance to escape the nightmare that had become his prison. After making the pact with the mysterious voices from the depths of the ocean, the lighthouse seemed to come to life. The waters that flooded the tower began to slowly retreat, as if they were obeying an invisible command. Richard watched in amazement as the water level dropped, revealing the stone floor that had been hidden. As the water continued to recede, a spiral staircase leading further down into the bowels of the lighthouse was revealed. It was as if the lighthouse itself invited him to explore its deepest secrets. Feeling he had no other option but to move forward, Richard descended the stairs. As he descended, the air became damp and cold, and the sound of the howling wind turned into a distant murmur. He could feel the presence of the mysterious voices as he went deeper into the darkness. Finally, the stairs led him to an underground chamber. What he saw there left him perplexed. The chamber was lit by a dim spectral light that seemed to come from all sides. Strange inscriptions and mystical symbols adorned the walls, creating an environment that seemed in tune with supernatural forces. In the center of the chamber, there was a stone platform with something that resembled an altar. On the altar, there was an object that glowed faintly. Richard approached it and saw that it was an old, dusty book, adorned with strange symbols. Upon opening the book, Richard found pages full of ancient and enigmatic writings. The words were difficult to understand, but he realized that they were records of mysterious rituals and ceremonies. It was as if the lighthouse had been used to carry out hidden and forbidden practices. As Richard leafed through the book, the mysterious voices from the depths began to whisper again in his mind. "You're close to the truth, Richard," they murmured. "Read on and find out what happened in this dark place." With renewed courage, Richard continued reading. The book revealed a disturbing story about the lighthouse keepers who, generations ago, had practiced dark rituals in search of forbidden power and knowledge. The rituals had gone horribly wrong, resulting in a curse that had turned the lighthouse into their underwater prison. As Richard read, the story became more and more sinister. The caretakers had sacrificed their own souls in exchange for power, imprisoning themselves in the lighthouse for all eternity. The lighthouse was now a trap that attracted unwary sailors, condemning them to the same fate. Richard knew he himself was trapped in this evil cycle, but voices from deep urged him to continue. They gave him clues on how to break the curse that imprisoned the lighthouse and himself. Determined to free himself and put an end to the curse, Richard decided to follow the instructions of the mysterious voices. He knew he would face terrible challenges, but his search for truth and freedom compelled him to continue. As the voices guided him into the depths of the lighthouse, Richard prepared for the fight that awaited him. He was willing to face the unknown and uncover the hidden secrets of the Raven's Hollow Lighthouse. Determined to break the curse imprisoning the Raven's Hollow Lighthouse, Richard followed the instructions of the mysterious voices echoing from the depths of the lighthouse. The voices led him to a dark, narrow corridor that extended deeper into the building's bowels. The air was permeated with an ominous energy that seemed to vibrate off the walls. With every step he took, the corridor seemed to stretch infinitely, as if it was playing with his perception of time and space. Richard could feel the weight of the lighthouse's dark past weighing down on him, but his determination kept him moving forward. The voices guided him to an ancient wooden door, adorned with mysterious symbols. Opening it, Richard found a dark, damp chamber, lit only by candles burning in iron stands. In the center of the chamber, there was a circle drawn on the ground with strange symbols and inscriptions around it. Richard knew that that circle was the center of an ancient ritual, the same one that had given rise to the curse that imprisoned the lighthouse. The mysterious voices whispered the words he must recite and the gestures he must make to undo the curse. With firm determination, Richard began to follow instructions. As he recited the ancient words, a dark energy began to fill the chamber, causing the candles to flicker and shadows to dance on the walls. He felt like he was at a crossroads between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Then, something extraordinary happened. A shadowy figure began to take shape within the circle, emerging from the shadows like an apparition. It was one of the lighthouse's former caretakers, a man who had been consumed by the darkness of the ritual. The ghost janitor looked at Richard with empty, sad eyes. He spoke with a voice that seemed to echo from beyond the grave. "You came to break the curse that imprisons this place, but know that freedom comes at a price." Richard swallowed and nodded. He was willing to pay any price to free himself and the beacon from the curse that held them captive. The ghost caretaker explained that, to break the curse, Richard would need to face one last ordeal. He would be confronted with his worst memories and his deepest fears. Only by overcoming them and demonstrating courage and determination could he free the lighthouse. With a dark gesture, the ghost janitor caused the shadows in the chamber to twist and transform into terrifying images. Richard saw flashes of his past, moments of weakness and regret that haunted him. With each disturbing vision, Richard felt his resolve waver, but he forced himself to face his fears. He remembered his promise to break the curse and refused to surrender. The mysterious voices echoed in the chamber, encouraging him to continue. Richard finally realized that he was not alone on this journey. With each memory he confronted, he gained strength and courage. Finally, after facing his worst fears and regrets, Richard felt a sense of triumph. The ghost janitor smiled gratefully and disappeared into the shadows. The lighthouse shook violently, as if the curse was being lifted. The mysterious voices celebrated his victory, and Richard knew he had fulfilled his destiny. The Raven's Hollow lighthouse was free of the curse that imprisoned it. With one last look at the chamber where so many dark secrets had been kept, he headed for the surface, determined to start a new life far from that haunted village. As Richard emerged from the lighthouse, he looked back one last time. The lighthouse was now silent, its eternal light finally extinguished. The village of Raven's Hollow would remain a place of mystery and legend, but the curse that had haunted the lighthouse had been broken. Richard knew his sacrifice had not been in vain, and he set out to face the unknown with a feeling of freedom and hope in his heart.